what has meant to this township through the years. Needless to say, we're so excited to have our friends from the Perkiomen Railroad Historical Society, Bonnie, Steve, and George, and Jeff. Sorry, Jeff. They've been with us before, have done a wonderful job, and they have a new presentation, so we'll be seeing the new presentation tonight. They'll be going through all of the 38 stations, so if you have any questions about that, this is the time to do it, particularly as we get ready for the 250th of America 250 PA. So, welcome, and at this point I would ask you all to rise as you're able for a moment of silence. Amen. And if we could pledge the flag, led by Rick. Before we get started, we are going, go ahead, have a seat, thank you. Just want to remind you of our next event, which is going to be on May 26th, when we have the Memorial Day tribute. And if you know, we honor all those people who are deceased and had service as a veteran with our armed forces. So we would ask that you put that on your calendar, and if you know anyone who has recently died and we should be adding them to that tribute, please let us know. Judy? Oh, I saw your hand go up. Okay. I'll wave. Hi, Nance. Is there any other information that needs to be shared at this point? Yep. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Bonnie? Welcome.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. My name is Bonnie Slater, and I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Perkiomen Road Historical Society. We started our group in 2014 to let everyone be more aware of the trail, the railroad that was here. Because a lot of the people think that the walking trail was just always a trail, that they didn't know steam engines went by and it was trains and all the history of the trains. So we have a membership too. Actually, we forgot our brochures tonight, so that's my husband. So, but we do have a membership. It's $15 a year, and it does help us to be able to do more research and check things out. We have we had gone to Strasbourg and we had done some research about the track charts. And Steve can tell you a little bit more about the track charts. The track charts actually show everything that was back in the day around like the 1900s. And a lot of this stuff is pretty pricey for us to do, so that really helps us to get there. We do have a Facebook page, so you can go on that, but we do have some other information if you'd like to see that. And now Steve Mallon, and that's my son. He is the president, and he will give you some of the history. And then George Slater, that's my husband, he is the vice president, and he will give the presentation on the stations.
Hello. I'm glad there's a mic here today because I was at an event all day yesterday, and I kind of beat up my voice, so I didn't talk much today, so I think I got it mostly back, but I'm not a loud talker to start with, so this helps. All right. Like everybody else said, thank you for coming out tonight. Do a little history of the line first. If you've seen our talks before, of course, the history doesn't change. People try to change sometimes, but it doesn't. So I'm sure most of you out there have heard of the Perkiomen Railroad, and sure you've heard of the Reading Railroad, and you've heard of the Perkiomen branch of the Reading Railroad. Well, those all apply to the Perkiomen Railroad. Get that question asked a lot. If you talk about the Perkiomen, the line that went from Oaks to Emmaus, people will often say, well, I thought that was the Reading Railroad. Or you talk about the Reading, and they say, I thought that was the Perkiomen. Well, It was both, actually. But in the very beginning, it was originally chartered in 1852 as the Norristown and Freemansburg Railroad, originally. That's a name often lost to history, Norristown and Freemansburg. Then in 1854, the North Penn Railroad decided wanted to charter the same route as they were going to charter from Norristown to Freemansburg. So they rechartered the line again in that same year to go from Norristown to Allentown, and they renamed it the Norristown and Allentown Railroad. Well, before they could get off the ground and get things going and get the land acquisition and all the stuff that goes along with building a railroad, the Civil War broke out, and the railroad was pretty much put on hold until 1865, after the Civil War ended. And it was rechartered once again as the Perkiomen Railroad Company. So it started out Norristown and Freemansburg, Norristown, Allentown, then finally 1865 is when we first saw or heard of the Perkiomen Railroad. So by 1867, the construction started. Started the construction of the line in 1867. 1868, the line hit Collegeville at first. That was the first part. They always say the line was basically done in 3 stages, although it kind of didn't, it wasn't like one stage and then they opened them up as 3, kind of slowly opened up, but they still call it 3 stages. So 1868, it made its way to Collegeville. 1869 made it to Schwanksville. 1872, the line made it to Green Lane. And then by 1874, the line was finished between Oaks and Emmaus. The line was completely finished. Oftentimes, people often say, well, I thought the line was done in 1874. Some say 1875. Well, the line was completed in 1874, but it didn't run completely through until 1875 because the Dillinger Tunnel wasn't completed yet. So the 1,750 feet of Dillinger Tunnel was not complete till 75, and that's when the first trains went complete from Oaks to Emmaus, which is one of those other little tidbits you, over the years of research, and you find different answers, and then you kind of put pieces together once you realize, the third piece, and then it makes sense. Because even though this line is fairly well documented and pretty popular, finding certain information on it's still kind of tricky. It hasn't been a super easy line to research. And there's still stuff we're trying to figure out, find little details. But like I always say, you have 38 miles of track and you got 150 years and counting. There's a lot to find. So, like all railroads, the Perkiomen had passenger freight, and was even considered a tourist railroad at one point. Passenger trains, at the peak of popularity by the late 1920s, they were running 8 trains a day, 4 up and 4 back across the whole line. But as you went into the 30s and 40s, cars became more readily available. They became more reliable. More people had cars. So passenger service started to die off by the late 1930s. It had a little bit of a rebound during World War II, where it picked up a little bit more for traffic on the railroads. But for the most part, by the end of the 40s, they were down to only 2 trains a day. And then by July 1955, it was the last passenger train on the Perkiomen. So that was the last passenger train. Freight, however, continued the whole time of it, and even to this day, from Pennsburg to Emmaus, there's still freight being run by the East Penn Railroad. Freight, of course, freight. They had local freight, and they had through freight that would run the whole line, just going usually to the city through freight. Along the local stuff, there was quarries, ice houses, knitting mills, cigar factories. Although, as far as we know, none of the cigar factories actually had sidings. They were close to the rail, like in Red Hill, but there was never an actual siding to any of the cigar factories as far as we could ever find. but we're sure they utilized the rail in one way or another. Also, a little thing I always like to add, which I forgot earlier, is like I said, the line was done basically in sections. And in 1872, when it reached Green Lane, a little fact that a lot of people don't know, when the line hit Green Lane, there was actually a turntable placed in Green Lane. There was a small turntable and a single stall engine house. So, because at that point in the time, Green Lane was basically the halfway point of the railroad. So they put the engine house and the small turntable in Green Lane so they could turn the engine, obviously, to head back the line. Because at that point, that was about 18 miles, I'd say, from Oaks. That's a little bit far to shove a train back. And then that roundhouse was later moved to Pennsburg, which is kind of an interesting fact that Pennsburg, it was a lot. They built an engine house and a turntable in Pennsburg. And I have the exact date of that, and now I can't find it. I had it memorized at one time. I find where I got that about which to me, that's always a really neat fact, that there's actually, like I said, an engine house and a turntable in Pennsburg. It was located between 2nd and 4th Street, not far from the Pennsburg station. It was put in, this must be my old notes. Oh, here it is. It's hard to memorize everything. The turntable was actually put in 1897. The turntable was put in Pennsburg. But by 1909, it they had issues with it, so they basically fixed it in one position. And the engine house turned into basically just a shop. And you'll see in the slide presentation later a picture of the roundhouse. And in that picture, you'll see part of the turntable pit, but that's when it was already set permanent, and they already built onto the roundhouse in the front. You can't really see the stalls anymore in the picture. But by 1909, like I said, it was already fit. I'm not sure what year they made it not usable anymore, but by 1909 it was removed, and parts of it ended up in Bridgeport. So parts of the turntable started out in the Green Lane, went to Pennsburg, and ended up in Bridgeport. Also, I mentioned that it was basically like a tourist line, not like a tourist railroad of today where you go back and forth in a couple miles, but people came mostly down into this area from the city because of the fresh water and camping and clean air. If you know anything about cities being congested, well, imagine what the cities were like in the early days of horses in the streets and early day plumbing. So people think that people forget about that at one point, how the cities were with the dirt roads and all the horses and the so it's nice to get away from it. So pretty much from Springmount down through Salford, Schwanksville, all along that stretch, it was cottages, there was hotels, farmers would turn their farm fields into campgrounds during the season, and pretty much if you go along the line, any little cottage or rows, it looks like rows of little houses or anything you see out there were probably built for the tourist trade. And that started fading off probably, kind of like when the passenger train started fading out, probably around the 30s, early 30s, it started to die off. But at one point in time, this area here was actually a very popular tourist attraction. And a more recent thing I noticed, which I've been like to add to my talks lately, is for some reason, even to this day, a lot of like beach communities and tourist areas, even though they make a good portion of their economy on tourism, they have a problem with tourists. If you know anything about beach communities, a lot of them they have an issue, the whole locals only thing, and I don't understand it. But that's nothing new. In this area, the locals got annoyed with the tourism, and they had a derogatory term. It was like this. They called them summer freshies. And being of Pennsylvania Dutch descent myself, I can hear that being said that way, and I can just imagine what terms they used to use that in back in those days. But I found that actually in two different articles about the summertime and the summer freshies and how they would have conflicts with the locals, which is kind of wouldn't expect that back in those days in this area, you know. But seems to be a common thread. Also, there were so many tourists coming in that some of the trains on Sundays were up to 14 coaches long to take the tourists back to the city. A lot of the stations along the line over the years were replaced usually because they burnt, but like Springmount was actually built because they needed a larger station to accommodate all the tourism. And like I said, 14 coaches, even on today's standards, if you see an Amtrak or something with 14, that's a lot. So if we figure 1920s, that's a nice long train. So also, I was saying about with the line. The line was formed as a Perkiomen Railroad in 1865, and early on, the Philadelphia and Reading, which later became the Reading Railroad, actually had controlling interest and basically helped the Perkiomen Railroad get going. If it wasn't for the Philadelphia and Reading, the Perkiomen probably wouldn't have happened. Probably wouldn't have existed without the Philadelphia and Reading's backing and finances and resources. But in 1879, the Philadelphia and Reading pulled out controlling interest, and from 1879 to 1897, the Perkiomen Railroad was its own entity. It was on its own, completely on its own at that time. Then in 1897, the railroad went bankrupt, and the Philadelphia and Reading bought back into it again, back into controlling interest. You know, that's why I said earlier about, you know, how does when I say Philadelphia and Reading, a lot of people, some people will say the Philadelphia and Reading and the Reading Railroad were different. It changed, but technically, as far as I'm concerned, it's the same railroad. But that's another story for another time. So what happened is when they bought back, even though they had controlling interest up until 1945, when the Perkiomen Railroad ceased to exist in 1945, it became solely the Perkiomen branch of the Reading Railroad. But until 1945, they had, you would see, we have like ticket stubs and shipping receipts. You'll see Perkiomen Railroad Company, and you'll either see Philadelphia and Reading in there on it, or you'll see Reading with that. Because like I said, it was its own railroad, but it had control by the Reading. And like I said, but no, by 1945, Reading, they also merged a lot of other railroads into basically branches. Like I said, then it became the Perkiomen branch of the Reading. And then anybody who knows local railroad history knows what happened in 1976, April 1st. Conrail Day. It's where the state basically, or the country basically took, state basically took over a bunch of failing railroads and made Conrail, Consolidated Rail. But before that, the Reading actually, well, they abandoned. This is something that gets a little bit of a gray area too, which we still debate and find different answers to as to what parts of the line were abandoned first. Somewhere out between Springmount, Schwanksville, up to Crusher Road in Perkiomenville was taken out of service after Agnes. Some say it wasn't. Some say 72, 73. That, I don't know. Sometimes when you have a good source that says two different answers, you get you're like, well, which one was it? Exactly, you know? But the first section of rail was removed in 1975. That we know. The first section of rail up to Crusher Road was removed in 1975. We actually have the track charts and photographs to show the first section of rail that was removed. But so then the remaining rail that was still in service actually was from Pennsburg to Emmaus, was taken over by Conrail. They were the designated operators. 1983, the Anthracite Railroad took over. 1989, Reading and Northern took over. And then in 1995, East Penn took over. And East Penn still operates the line to this day. So that's a semi-brief history of the line. After we're done with the slide presentation, if you guys have any questions, we will answer any questions. So I'll hand it over to George here for the 28 stations of the Perkiomen. Thanks.
Unmute lapel. Hello. Test 1, 2. All right, good evening, folks. Pardon me for sitting down, but my hips bother me tonight. But sit back and relax and enjoy yourself. We're going to go take a tour of all the stations on the Perkiomen Railroad. The first station up, not officially on the railroad, but this is where the Perkiomen Railroad started. And my laser pointer isn't working, but past the tower on the upper right, that was the beginning of the Perkiomen Railroad. Originally, the first station was built at Perkiomen Junction in 1868. And then this picture, this was the station and the area got changed around. This was built in 1909. Believe it or not, this station's still down there. Semi-changed, it burnt. It was a couple different businesses, but the station's still there. The tower, the foundation's still there. But other than that, and I believe one track is out, but it pretty much looks like it did back in the day. And just another picture of the station complex from another angle. We actually had a friend of ours, he was rooting around in the basement down in the stone section in the picture, and he found train orders and gave us a stack of train orders from the late 40s into the 50s. Now, this is Oaks. Originally called Oakland Station. This station, and you'll see under the name, you'll see the date that it was built. Believe it or not, Oak Station's still there today. But we're not sure. We believe it might have got moved, because if you go down to Egypt Road and see the way it's lined up with Egypt Road, it looks like it got moved. It shifted. And then there's another view of Oaks. In the foreground, that's Egypt Road. But if you look at the station versus Egypt Road today, maybe Egypt Road got switched because it's on an angle to it. Paulings Road. It's actually in Chester County, Washington. I think it's Washington Township. Yeah, it's not far from the Expo Center. Yeah, and this is just another shot of the Oak Station. Go ahead. Arcola, the next station on the line. Originally, Arcola was called Doe Run because they built it close to Doe Run Creek. Then it was changed to Water Tank because, I don't know, Steve mentioned it, the railroad built a water tank close to the station. And then it just assumed the name of Arcola. Unfortunately, this station has been long gone. And then another view of Arcola Station. You see the girl on the platform. And then if you look up track, you can see the platform where all the milk cans. We believe this is an afternoon picture because traditionally the first train down from Emmaus on the Perk Railroad was the milk train. And it was a local. It hit every stop so the farmers could drop off their milk. Okay, next in line we have, oh, this is a toughie. Now, I've heard this a couple different ways how to say it. I say Yerkes. I hear Yerkes, Yerkes. I say Yerkes. Yeah, unfortunately, Yerkes, this station's long gone too. But that was part of the trail. Next in line, we have Collegeville, originally called Freeland. And the reason it got changed to Collegeville, because there was an argument, and the president of the railroad said, I know how to solve this. He says, whoever subscribes the most shares, so they got the station name. Well, it was Collegeville. The original station in Collegeville was built in 1868, and then in 1898, they rebuilt it with a brick station. Sad part about Collegeville, they tried to save it. There was a couple different businesses in there. They tried to save it, and very mysteriously, there was a fire. And they bulldozed it down, and they made the Pizza Hut, if you're familiar with Collegeville. And right now, that location, that's where the Collegeville Diner is. And if you walk down in the back parking lot, you can still see some of the telephone poles lining up. There's one or two of them. And this is just another scene of Collegeville. This was later, I believe. This got to be the late 60s, early 70s. Now, there was actually, down here, they called this area Freeland, the Collegeville area. Next in line, we have Ron's, originally called Iron Bridge. And then they renamed it, actually, the railroad renamed it Ron's. This station built in 1871 wood. Unfortunately, this one's long gone, too. And then another shot of Ron's from the opposite end. The brick building on the left, the upper left, they just tore that down within the past 2 years. This area would be right where the Ron's concrete plant is. It gives you any retrospect. And then this is actually a rare picture. Somebody shared this on our site. This is the inside of the Ron's station, circa 1908, and the station master, that's Fred Berman. He went on to be station master at station agent in Schwenksville later in his career, and he retired from Schwenksville. And then just another angle of Gratersford. Originally, it was Gratersford. No, Graterford, like it says. Then they added the S on. Why? I don't know. But now that area is called Gratersford. And then you see on the right the covered platform for the milk cans. And then we have another shot of Graterford from a reversed angle. Skip back. You notice the screen's blank. Well, in 1868, the railroad did have a stop, and they called it Skipback. It was about a mile below. It was between Gratersford and Schwenksville. And we know from doing a little bit of research, there really isn't a lot of information on this. It was there for a couple years, and then they just dissolved it. And then here's the big station at Schwenksville. This was the original station. The picture doesn't show it any justice. That building was over 80 foot long. And unfortunately, this one burnt in March of 1942, and they rebuilt it to the brick one, and that's what it is today, is Snoozy's Lounge, or Snoozy's Cafe. Snoozy's Lounge. Yeah, I could go for a beer. Snoozy's Lounge. Lounge and Cafe, I'm sorry. And then we threw this picture in just above Schwenksville. There was another station that was Zieglerville. And this was a lady's coal shed that was behind the station. And this is Zieglersville Station. If you go up 29, past the light in Schwenksville, and before Moshe's restaurant, if you look down to your right, you can see that bridge. It's still there. It's still going over the creek. And that's where the station was. And to the left of the station, that was Lady's Coal Yard. Yeah, and then there's another shot. It's actually a better shot. Shows most of the coal yard shed. Okay, above the bridge. In Zieglersville, believe it or not, they had a covered bridge. We've seen two of them, one at Zieglersville and then there was one at Green Lane. Above the bridge, you see a funny looking ornament up there. Well, that was a signal. Most stations had the semaphore pole next to the station for whatever reason, because this was a tight curve at Zieglersville, they put the signal up on the bridge so the train crews coming down and going up could see it clear. And this is a rare angle. Somebody went into the creek and took a shot head on into you could see a good shot of the bridge. What we can't zero in on is under the station name, there's some writing we just can't, you blow it up, it gets all distorted. Really had no clue what's under there. Springmount, next station in line, originally called Klein's. Then they changed it to Frederick or Frederick Station. This was the original station built in 1884. Like Steve said, some stations burnt. Actually, Springmount, because they were doing a lot of business, they rebuilt it. They rebuilt it and built a brick station. And you can see a corner. They built a bigger station and added brick because they were doing such a business. And then below the station, you can see where the Grove. I forget the name of the Grove, but the guy ran it for years and years. And actually, it's still flat all down in there. I wonder where this one is. Salford Station. I have a picture of that when it became a house. I have it here, if anybody wants to see it. Yeah, originally called Ziegler's Mill. Then they changed the name to Rudy, and a lot of people ask, well, why Rudy? Well, Rudy was the station master at the time. And then they changed it to Salford Station. Unfortunately, if you go up to this location today, all the other buildings are there except the station. They tore it down. And they actually used some of the wood from this station to build a home. I can tell you it's on Sepp Road. I'm not going to tell you the exact address. Yeah, but it's on Sepp Road. They use a lot of the wood from this. And just another shot of the station. The semaphore pole there on the right, if you go up to this location today, you can still see the concrete base for the semaphore pole there. So it'll give you an idea. It's right near the post office. Hendrick Station. This was a flag stop. Built in 1881, and this survived up into the 50s. They finally retired it, but it didn't get torn down. It got moved, and it's only about a quarter mile away from its original location. Okay, this picture was a later date. We believe this is just before the station got retired. You can see a poster in the window there. We believe that was the notice from the Reading Company saying that the station and agency was going to be closed. And here's Kratz. Funny thing with Kratz. We only have one picture, Kratz. This is the only known picture that we know of. If you take a look behind the station to the left, you see that blurred out black? Well, that's actually a farmhouse, but you can't really tell. And then right past the crossing, there's a lot of people think of it as a tunnel. It actually is a tunnel, but it's a spring house that runs underneath the tracks. What the railroad did, they wanted the right of way to build the railroad, so they had made an agreement with the landowner. They fortified the spring house and they built it over the spring house. And if you go down there, that's still down there today. We got invited by the homeowner to go in there, and it was warm. It was about 85 degrees out. We walked into that spring house. It was about a balmy 60. And then here's a bridge. Here's a picture of the bridge, the iron bridge, where the Unami and the Perkiomen tricks. We put this picture in just to give you an idea. Look at the architecture on the stonework. Them guys actually took a lot of pride when they built anything years ago. And you can still see that today. If you want to venture down off the trail and walk down low, you can still see it. But the beautiful stonework. Perkiomenville Station. This is the first one, built in 1873. If you're not familiar with this, this is the site of the Perkiomen sale. Actually, 29 is behind the station to your left. Station actually faced. And the first station didn't build. Believe it or not, Perkiomenville was a happening place back in the day and very busy. So the railroad, they decided that they built a brick station. And that stayed until the 50s when it got tore down. Green Lane. Like Steve said, actually Green Lane, this was the busiest station on the Perkiomen Railroad. They had the engine house, a single stall engine house at one time. They had a water tank. You could still see the stone base of the water tank. They had a maintenance headquarters there for the maintenance away crew. And this station actually lasted into the 60s when Agway bought the property off the railroad. And unfortunately, they had to tear down the station and they built the Agway. Now, I believe it's the William Penn car, Green Lane Automotive, William Penn. Yeah, that's 29 right there. And my wife always says, Bonnie, when she was a kid going down there, what did you used to say? Kadunk-a-dunk. Kadunk-a-dunk, kadunk-a-dunk. There was a lot of tracks in Green Lane, at least 3 or 4. Now, this is a shot of the water tower, the brick building in the middle, that was the pump house. That supplied water from the creek to the water tank or water tower. And then the far building, that was the tool shed. Like I said, there was a couple of them there because that was a maintenance away headquarters. And everything's gone except the stone base of the water tank. That's still there to this day. And then there's another shot, more of a human interest shot that somebody would give us these pictures. It gives you a retrospective of what it looked like, we believe, in the 40s, mid-late 40s, early 50s. McLean Station. This was a flag stop. And actually, if you look real close up at the top of the semaphore, the maintainer's up there, Charles Jones. This picture is actually from the 20s. McLean Station was actually built in 1908. This is a later, yeah, there he is. There's Charles posing for the cameraman. And the bridge that's to the right of the station, that's actually McLean Station Road. But if you go up there today, you will not recognize this area. When they shut the road down and the golf course started to get hot and heavy, they bulldozed everything. The station was actually saved and put on the property, used as a dollhouse. And actually, it just fell apart. It deteriorated because it was old. But it was there till the 70s. Another station, Hilligus. We're still not exactly 100% sure where this was. We know it was built after 1875, and they used it for a couple years, actually before the Red Hill station got built. But other than that, there's very little information on this. Welker's was another one of them stations. Welker's was situated about where the current, well, the later Red Hill station was. Welker was a big name in that area. So was Hilligas. All right, Red Hill Station, built in 1909. The station was built first, and then you see the freight house was added on a couple years later. And then you see the long platform for the milk and a couple outbuildings. Red Hill lasted until the end of passenger service in July of '55. They tore the station down, and the freight house was up for a couple more years after that, right? And then they finally tore the freight house down. And then there's another view looking at coming from Bay. Then people were cold standing out there. 6th Street.
6th Street, Red Hill, where the storage sheds are now.
Yeah, we're about Stauffer's.
Stuff is manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. And then there's another reverse angle. Now, Steve just did a YouTube documentary on this, right, a couple weeks ago. And he believes that concrete step's still up there.
But there's still concrete in there.
And you can't see it, but the milk house is behind the freight house. The milk house is still up there.
The Freedom Riders used to have that as their place. I grew up right.
Hanover. This is another one. We actually do know where Hanover was. Believe it or not, when they first built the Perkiomen Railroad, you know the bridge that they just rebuilt went from Red Hill to Pennsburg? Well, actually, the railroad was at grade at one time, and the Hanover station would have been on the right-hand side. As you would have come over the bridge now, it would have been on the right. And that's another one that only lasted a couple of years. It was gone by 1880. Yet we have another one, Supers, was just above Hanover and before Pennsburg. This was a flag stop. Actually, this was named after one of the board of directors for the railroad, Philip Supers. This one only lasted till about 1880. We're not quite sure.
Probably before 8th Street.
We're not quite sure exactly where it was. Very, very little information on it, but we figured we add them to it, you know, our station presentation, because they actually were stops at one time. Pennsburg Station, the original, the one and only, built in 1872. She's still up there. Now, like Steve had said, the turntable just above Pennsburg Station, the railroad built a semi-roundhouse and they had a turntable up there. Yes, yes, Pennsburg Station is still in the same spot as when they first built it in 1872. Another stop was right past the station at the Perkiomen School. They had when they had special commencements, they would actually pull into the siding, and the siding's still there to this day. And they would let them off, and they would walk down to the buildings proper. Here's what Steve was talking about. This is just above the station. And this is where, if you're familiar with Pennsburg, where Stokes Manufacturing was. At one time, they did have a semi-roundhouse, at least 4 or 5 stalls. I see roof fence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stalls. And you could see the turntable, but by this time, the turntable was straight. It didn't move anymore. They just made it a straight track. And that car that's above the turntable, that's the only known car that actually had Perkiomen Railroad written on it. If you zoom into that, you can see Perkiomen Railroad. Yeah, we have a better picture a little later on. Yeah, Steve scares us a little bit. And here's the infamous double station. This is the Perkiomen station, I'm sorry, the Pennsburg station. The railroad consolidated and they closed the East Greenville, and they had train orders given out at Pennsburg. And you can see the pseudo asbestos siding on the building, which removed at a later date. This is the original East Greenville station when it was built. We got this picture. We did a presentation down at for the Pottstown Historical Society last year, and they had that's a newspaper clipping of the station, and they let us have it. Here we go. There's a new one. East Greenville, the original one did burn, and they rebuilt the new one in 1923. If anybody's familiar with the area, and I know Steve loves this, there for a time this was called Daffy Junction. Fourth, isn't it? That's 4th Street, isn't it? Yeah, 4th. Yeah, that's still there. Matter of fact, a couple years ago, it got put up for sale. The realtor called us and said, "Hey, I got a building. It's a station. You can buy it if you want." Well, we didn't have an extra $350,000 laying around, so. Yeah, we were short a lot. Yeah, we were short a lot. But it's still there. It's a private residence today. All right, our next station along the line is the Palm Station, originally built 1879. Unfortunately, Palm Station was torn down. But believe it or not, if you go up to that area, you can still see part of the freight house. They salvaged the brick section of the freight house, and it's still there today. And you can still see embedded in the brick the rings for the hitch the horses up. This is Corning. Now, if you look close, Corning looked very similar to Kratz, but Corning was just a tad smaller. This was a flag stop. It was built later in 1900. If you look now, take notice of the building behind it. We have another picture. It'll show the whole complex. And you can see how the house got built onto. Actually, if you go up there today, that building is still there. All the buildings are there, and of course the station's long gone. What if, I've been saying flag stop. What a flag stop is you see the semaphore pole, the big pole. All right, if you wanted to catch a train to go anywhere, you would have to go up. You would have to manually set the arms up to let the engineer know that you were wanted to get picked up. Flag stops, they didn't have any agents. Flag stop. There was another one. This was short-lived. It was called Turnpike. This one was actually, there's a platform and shelter was built at the Turnpike siding. Other names that were going to be suggested for this were Milford and Trump's, as it was built on the property of Elias Trump. And this didn't last very long, maybe a couple years. And as we get further north, the next stop is Hosensack. And for the people that don't know or not of the Dutchy major, Hosensack is what? Trouser pockets. That's what that means. In the fatherland. Yeah, Hosensack, another one today. It's long gone, but I believe Steve, I think you did a walking tour up there, correct? And you know where about the station's at? And then this is just another angle of the station. It's like all the tracks are gone except for one, the main. Zionsville, or as they used to say, Old Zionsville, PA. This was originally built in 1879. Unfortunately, Zionsville's been long gone too. That's what was left of Zionsville in the early 70s. Here we go. I know a lot of people get this name screwed up. It's actually Dillinger. A lot of people say it's Dillinger. It's actually Dillinger. Originally called Shelley, but because there was a Shelley on the North Penn Bethlehem branch, they renamed it Dillinger. And rumor has it was believed to be named in honor of one of the engineers on the railroad, one of the construction engineers. And this is another second angle view. A funny looking contraption on the other side of the track. That was the car used to inspect the tunnel. That had the platform on it, because tunnel is very high maintenance, constantly maintaining that. And here's another shot of one of the T1s coming out. Coming, I believe, they're going westbound. And this was the south end of the Dillinger Tunnel. This was the tunnel washing machine. And that stood there up until mid-late 90s.
Mid-90s, early 90s. I used to play in that when I was a kid.
And here's a shot of the north end. And a lot of people don't realize that, but above the tunnel, northeast extension of the turnpike runs over the top. But try to figure out where this is from the turnpike is a nightmare, I'm telling you. We went slow, we crawled. You cannot see this railroad from the... But it's there, the turnpike's above it.
And when you're down at the tunnel, you can't see the
Can't see the turnpike.
So it's somewhere, it's some different dimensions.
Yeah, they hit it pretty good.
I had the anvil and the lantern from the Dillingerville repair shack. My dad and his boss on the railroad were instructed to tear it down, and they were allowed to keep whatever they wanted. His boss wanted the potbelly stove, and my dad wanted the anvil.
Speaking of Dillinger, there's a gentleman that lives up in Veracruz. He has the lamp for the semaphore pole. They found it before they were tearing the station down. It was up in the attic of the station.
Can you access that tunnel now? Can you walk into it?
You can. I saw an active duty truck. I wouldn't buy it.
Oh.
I wouldn't buy it.
And you gotta know just where it's at too, because you can't see it from the road. The one end you can kind of see from the road, but the other end, when you cross the tracks and look, you can't see it's a bend. I'm not
You
saying,
can.
I'm not saying I did it, but I'm not sure I walked it.
It's about 1,600 some feet, give or take.
1750.
Close enough. What's 100 feet above the ground? But that's one of the, I believe this was the third longest tunnel on the Reading system.
Back in the early 70s, my brothers and I walked through it. From this side, we went up and sat on the turnpike. There's a big vent of some sort over the tunnel that we found.
Yeah, that was the area, that was to get all the smoke and cinders, so it didn't kill the crew and the passengers.
The interesting part was from the south, it's brick, and just before the north end, it's just natural rock.
I'd like to find that bend sometime.
Yeah, we don't know why they built, one end was really nice and the other end was not nice.
They also actually, when they were building the tunnel, that bend was already built for construction. And they would actually also go down inside through the bend. And they're, well, what was it, our friend was telling us they were working on it from each end.
From both ends.
And they were also going down through that bend. There's actually an access, they were working to get down to when it was being built.
See, if you start from the north end and climb up, then
Now this, one last thing with Billinger. Remember folks, from Pennsburg North, this is all active rail, so I can't say, if you want to go up there and take a walk into the tunnel, that's on you. And then next station in line, Veracruz. This was a small state. This was actually had an agent. What I mean, the difference between a flag stop station and a regular station. Below the station sign, to the right, you'll see RA. That was the railroad's telegraph letters for Veracruz. If an operator wanted to get it, they would tap out RA, and then the agent in Veracruz would tap out, and then they would relay messages. But the flag stop stations didn't have telegraph capability, so you won't see the placards with the letters. And the last stop on the line, this was the one Emmaus. A lot of people, believe it or not, it was Emmaus with one M. And in 1939, the second M appeared. Why? I don't know. But I believe the building behind the station is still there, that house that you see. That's still there. And then this is Emmaus Junction Tower. This is what behind Harris Street.
Yeah, it's just past Harris Street. It's right, actually right behind, I don't know what they call it. We used to call it the Lehigh Valley, Lehigh Auto Line. I don't think they call it that anymore. When you go from Emmaus to Allentown, it's across from Harris Street. And I think it's a Honda dealership. You go behind the Honda dealership, where the tower sat, you can actually still see the land, the little flat area. It's not the left, but you can see where it actually sat.
Okay, these pictures, we acquired these a couple of years ago. This was the last passenger run, commercial passenger run on Perkiomen, July 15, 1955. And like I said, if you look at the station, you see two letters CV. That was College. And normally at this point in time, they would only have a combine car on a caboose because it was a combination train. They ran freight and passenger. So if you were in a hurry and they had to make a couple deliveries, you're not in a hurry anymore. We talked about track maps. This is what we get when we go up to the Pennsylvania Railroad Museum in Stratford. These are what they call, or a quarter-mile chart. We put the one on here, the Zieglerville, to show you how the tracks went off to the coal yard, how it went across the bridge. These are a wealth of knowledge. They were printed, they were made by the railroad in the early 1900s because the government wanted to know what the railroad owned. The railroads didn't do this because they were nice people. The government forced them. They wanted to know what all they owned so they could tax them accordingly. These particular ones for the Perkiomen were drawn in 1917. But this is actually it's a blueprint, or in railroad terms, it's a track chart. And it's a wealth of knowledge on these. Okay, we talked about the semaphore signal, and you see the lamp at the top. This station, you can't really see it real good, but this is Hendrick Station. You can see the station sign on the building. But we added that on to show you that's how it was lit with that kerosene semaphore lantern. No, it was Hendricks. Yeah, you can see it. It says Hendricks on there. Okay, now the fun part. Is there any questions?
What's the definitive latest information on Culverdale line?
Yeah, we all used to work at Culverdale. We're actually we still play with big trains.
Even as in what aspect of it?
Where we're supposed to branch off from Palm?
Oh, I mean, back in the day, not modern day.
No, not
All right, I can speak freely. Okay. We, it actually
And thanks. The voice is still. Sorry, I cut things a little short earlier. Just fighting this throat early from the weekend. But it was. We actually have a chart or a map that actually shows where the route would have went, but it was in dots, which meant it was proposed but never built. But apparently, if you go where Bartow Station is, if you look maybe about an eighth mile or a little less than an eighth mile from there, you can see some sections that were cut out and were actually graded for it, but there's never track laid.
Anything ever built down in Palm to start?
No.
Why or anything?
Well, the whole why in Palm has always been kind of a issue of debate. If you look at we have a map that actually shows a Y in Palm, and it actually shows it. And I mean, when they made maps, they wouldn't have put something that wasn't there. And the Y would have went from Palm Station, and the other Y would have been up just about past, just short of Corning, kind of like where that one bridge is. Everybody calls the can opener, the real low bridge. I forget the name of the road. That would have been, that was actually on a map. We actually have that, and we actually have some documentation talking about that Y. But there's no definitive proof of it, and if you go up and you look in that area, there's nothing that would show you where that Y would have once been. But the proposed Y for the Colbertdale extension would have been farther up, though, up near Powder Valley. If you look at the map, it actually up near Powder Valley areas where it shows the Y to connect to Colbertdale. So what we think was the proposal that we saw for the connection to Colbertdale was from 1873. So the line was still being built at that time. Actually, the map we have for the extension of Colbertdale, the line was only built to Pennsburg at that time. So we think what happened is that got scrapped, and then they put a Y in later on in Palm, but it never connected. It was in a different location. But like I said, we have a map that shows the Y, and we have a couple documents talking about the building of it, but we have no pictures of it. And if you go up to that area, me and a couple friends once in a while will go up in that area. His family owns land up in there, and we'll walk around. And when they took that Y out, they did a good job because there's no trace of it. But well, like I said, the one for the Colbertdale would have been up farther, closer to like Powder Valley area. Yep. Yeah.
My dad was a track crew for 34 years. He started at Schranksville Station in 39, and he worked, in 1946, he actually worked at the Green Line Station as a track crew. And he ended up in Royersford and Rawlins and Elvis, and he got moved all around.
All over the system.
They broke up the gangs. And one other thing, our great-grandparents had the resort in Salford called Merkel's Farm, which later was originally called Walnut Grove, and then it became Camp Rest-A-While. That was our great-grandparents' farm. And I didn't know if you knew that.
I didn't know you were related to him, but we actually, one of our other talks we did for the Historical Society for Salford, we actually talked about that, but I didn't know you were related to him.
I can show you pictures. I have them on my phone.
I like to see that, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to see that. The whole resort thing in this area is so intriguing, it's so cool that they
And
actually
my
have
dad
all
and I
that.
used to get our feed right off the railroad car at Salford Station when Bockley had the siding there. And I still, to this day, cannot believe that stuff didn't get stolen back then. You cut the seal on the boxcar, open it up, take 35 bags of feed, put them on the truck, and write down what you took and sign your name. And they sent you a bill.
People were honest back then, Paul.
I'll tell you what, it was the honor system. Even like today, out in like Lancaster area, some of the Amish have something kind of like that, like the little box. Even the Amish don't trust us because the one I saw last weekend was welded to the trailer. So it says a lot about even the Amish don't trust us anymore. Yeah, it was amazing, the honor system. You write down what you took and yep. But yeah, the one thing we did for the Salford, I always forget the full name. It's just Upper Salford. Because we deal with upper, lower here and there, and Milford, and sometimes I think my brain's overflowed.
Told you scares him.
But, but we did a presentation for them one time about the resorts and stuff, and we talked about Camp Rest a while and all that stuff in the talk. Yeah, yeah, we got the picture. I'd like to see them then. And where the station ended up at, the Salford station. I went out there on I went on that road one time. I think you told me about it one time. I went on Sepp Road. I'm thinking to myself, all right, it's probably a small single-story house. How hard could it be? Every house on Sepp Road is a small single-story house.
My good friend Kevin Faust owns it.
Yeah. Fa- is he on Facebook? I think he follows our page. Yeah. That name sounds familiar.
He lives in the train station.
So, hand back there?
Yeah, when the Perkiomen Railroad first started, was it privately owned or public? Public from the start?
It was public from the start.
Yeah, they bought stock.
They had
sold
stock, and it was public. And then, like I said, really early on, the Philadelphia and Reading bought into controlling interest to help get it off the ground.
Any big name owners in there?
Not that we know of.
Well, back in the day, big names like Sepp, Super, he was up in Pennsburg. I believe there was a Hillegas on the board.
A lot of Hillegas in that area.
Yeah, they were big names up there. Welkers was a big name. Bidding.
But as far as like nationally known big names, like there's no Rockefellers or anything like that involved. No. Another side note, though, talking about stations, you're saying about the one Salford where it's moved to now and how Hendrix still technically exists down the street. I was told by a person who lived in the Ron's area, there was a kid that back in the late 50s, the Ron station was actually moved down along the Perkiomen Creek as a cabin. And he said it wasn't Agnes, but another big flood apparently wiped it down, and it ended up getting washed down the Perkiomen Creek. So I don't know how true that is, but he's from the area, and if he was from that area, that's what he told me happened to the Ron station. Because we were at the train club one day talking about it, because the train club at Pennsylvania Live Steerers, we have the Ron sign from the station, which we had it, but the other club has it.
What line did the Perkiomen fight into it?
East Penn.
It was East Penn originally.
East Penn. Well, it went to Allentown, and then it went to Harrisburg.
It was East
That
Penn.
was the cross line.
Then Reading bought it out later on. That line's still active to this day. That's the Norfolk Southern Harrisburg line. It goes through Allentown all the way up to New York, and then it goes all the way the other way, all the way out into Ohio, I think, through Harrisburg out.
To Harrisburg.
Yeah, but it's
That was
basically
the cross
nowadays it's the Norfolk Southern Harrisburg line.
If you're
Yeah.
familiar with the Reading Company and the T1s, that was one of the reasons why they built the T1s, was to take a freight train a mile long and do it at 70 miles an hour on the cross line.
And the original East Penn line in Lehigh Valley, and the other end hooked up to the Reading. And another little known fact, the Pennsylvania Railroad went through that area too, outside of Oaks. And the Perkiomen Railroad actually had a diamond and actually went over top of the Pennsylvania Railroad, which is not far from Perk Junction.
What kind of freight does the East Penn take out in Pennsburg?
They have 3 customers. They do Blommer's Chocolate. They bring in the cocoa. They do offloading at the old Mrs. T's Pierogi, which used to be Pillsbury. They do offloading for Tank. I don't know what.
And a quarry. They do
And there's a stone crusher right near where East Greenville Station was. There's a rock crushing place where I guess they crush rocks. It's been there a long time. I'm not sure exactly, but those are the 3 basic customers they have now.
a lot of rock.
But the offloading of the tanker cars that they offload at the old Mrs. T's, or the old Pillsbury, later Mrs. T's, that's Mr. T. No relation. I don't know I forget what's in those tanks. I'm not sure anybody knows what's in those tanks. Natural gas or something? I don't, yeah. So they have 3 customers still. At one time, the old Brown printing plant, which actually, there's a siding that actually goes inside of the old Brown printing plant. And there's actually rumor that Amazon was looking to buy and put a distribution center in that building. And if that would have happened, that line would have really picked up business. But they must have enough, because I actually know a guy some years ago who wanted to buy the line and basically continue freight, but actually make a tourist line out of it. Yeah, and like Knowles, that line, you could fall off the loading dock at Knowles and hit the track, but Knowles never used it. They never had a siding, never used rail. It went right behind the building. But I know guys some years ago who actually who went to East Penn to purchase the line, and they're not interested in selling it. So those 3 customers must be doing enough business to them. Yeah. It used to be 3 times a week.
Yeah, it's like Monday, Wednesday,
It
Friday.
was like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and they'd either run early in the morning or they'd run later afternoon. But um, yeah. But a friend of mine just left there about a year ago, and he said now it's kind of like a as needed kind of thing. It's like they don't have like the set 3 days a week anymore, so it's kind of sporadic now. But it used to be 3 times a week. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's the Perkiomen Railroad? Is that a separate railroad or was that the Perkiomen line?
It was well. It started out as its own line with controlling interest, which meant the Reading was kind of like a silent partner kind of deal, not so silent, kind of helped run it. And then the Perkiomen later became officially part of the Reading. So it was kind of like, I wouldn't say it was owned by the Reading the whole time, but it was kind of controlled by the Philadelphia Reading or the Reading since the
Majority of
beginning.
stock.
Yeah, yeah. It became officially part of the Reading in 1945. The name Perkiomen Railroad basically ceased to exist in 1945, and it became the Perkiomen branch of the Reading Railroad. Yep. It was the same route. It's just a name change. Yep. And like we were saying, from Pennsburg to Emmaus, that it's run by the East Penn Railroad now, and that's still in service. So no passenger, but freight. Wish it was doing passenger. We did a little April Fool's joke on our page this year, saying they were going to start passenger service back to Emmaus, and sometimes sometimes humor gets lost or misunderstood, and even a friend of mine messaged me about it, and I had to tell him he was very excited that he could take the train to Allentown from Pennsburg, but I put the start date was going to be February 29th, 2026. So that should have been, plus it was April 1st, I posted it, but, you know. Yeah.
The Reading was a system.
Yeah.
That's what they called themselves, the Reading system. It was a lot easier for them, from a legal standpoint, take over this little railroad and that little railroad, and then not have to go back the property, the underlying property owners, and say, oh, by the way, we're the Reading now, and we now own it. So it was just so there was all these little, for example, the North Penn Railroad, which went from Philadelphia out to Lansdale, was still in existence up until the time, and I think they may still be in existence, up until the time that SEPTA acquired.
Yeah.
They stopped running passenger in 1981.
I'm sorry?
They stopped running passenger service on the North Penn in 1981. You could still take the RDC cars up to Bethlehem.
But it was the Reading was running it, but they were running it on technically another company's track, except they owned it. They owned
Yeah.
the company for all practical
Yeah, what the railroad did, they had the controlling interest. They probably bought 51% of the stock.
Yeah, you were saying about taking over the smaller lines, like how it took over the Perkiomen. At Reading Terminal, if you go upstairs, they got some of the pictures and displays at Reading Terminal in Philly. They actually have a list, which I keep taking a picture of every time I'm there, and I forget what I do with the picture. But it actually has a list of all the lines that the Reading merged, like the Allentown and Auburn, which was the Allentown Railroad, Colbrookdale, Perkiomen. There's a whole bunch of them. And someday I'll take a picture, remember where I put the picture, or I don't delete it.
Good friend of mine, Steve,
That's me.
no, sorry. Tim Scanlon just retired from the Slatington Railroad as a track inspector, and he told me, he said, don't be surprised if one day they don't start laying track behind your house again. He really believes that.
He thinks that, could you imagine the uproar trying to take that trail from people?
I wish they put it back to the railroad, believe me. The trail is a nuisance.
Well, that's the thing. That was called a rail trail, and well, that was already gone. That was gone before the whole rail trail thing was a thing. But they always call it trails to rails to trails. Yeah, rails to trails. We like to tell them we're going to start trails to rails. We put it back in. But a lot of people ask us that. They'll be like, well, why did they take out that line? The thing with railroads is railroads make a lot of money, from the small ones to the big ones. Like Union Pacific, I think 2 years ago, grossed like $2.5 billion. So Norfolk Southern was like, a lesser earner at like $1.5 billion. Railroads make a lot of money. They always have. But railroads are very cheap. Very cheap. Frugal. Just like cabooses. If you ever notice, if you look at, like, say, Reading Railroad only really ever had 4, maybe, in like 140 years of existence. They only had like 4 batches of cabooses. You had the bobbers, you had the early hack type style boxcar ones which weren't really documented. You had the bobbers, you had the northeasterns, you had the wide visions. And that was about the only cabooses Reading had. That's because they didn't make a money. They weren't revenue. They were for crew. So they weren't making money, so they ran them into the ground because they didn't need new ones, because they didn't want to make new ones. So I tell people, when the passenger service stopped, and then there's no need for freight, they're not going to keep a line in service and keep up on it for no reason. So that's why it went away. But it'd be nice to have it back. You could hitch a ride back to Pennsburg and Red Hill then. Have a flag stop in your backyard. What is basically your backyard? See another hand over? Oh, lost another hand.
Well, thank you for having us tonight.
Also, we got a couple pictures and a couple little odds and ends over there if you want to check them out. And thank you for showing up, and thanks for having us.
On Mike and